of the main themes of the 1960s is the counterculture, and I wanted to choose this photo, and it's a picture of birth control. Envoy was the first ever birth control FDA approved, and was actually legalized for women to use it in 1965, as stated in the Supreme Court, Griswold versus Connecticut. And actually, still in 26 states, women were not able to get this pill because it was very against conservative views. So I think this is an important photo because it definitely signifies the counterculture of the 1960s and women trying to gain more freedom and independence from simply getting married right after high school and then having children. Instead, it's a more independent lifestyle for women.
So another event in the 1960s that was really big for the counterculture was the Woodstock Music Arts Festival. So on about August 15th to August 18th, about 500,000 people gathered at Bethel, New York, and a 600-acre farm just to watch music. There were 32 acts that occurred, and this included like Jimi Hendrix, the Who, Jefferson Airplane, Creedence Clearwater Revival, and along many others. And just because this is actually a photo of the Who, I wanted to talk about them like just a little bit. So basically, they were supposed to be performing second to last on the second day. However, everything got delayed because they're not very good at time when they're high. But so they ended up performing on August 18th, very early in the morning. And as they were playing, people also watched the sunrise. And though this was a huge event in counterculture, it also kind of marked the end of it. Yeah. Okay, so I did my living history project on the one and only Paula Silverman. So this is young Paula Silverman. This is her now. So she grew up in Falls City, Nebraska, and she was born in 1953. So most of the 60s were in her school years, and it included like about elementary school up until high school. And she said that because she was in Falls City, it was a kind of like a bubble, so she never really experienced much of the counterculture movement, and there weren't very many African Americans there as well. And she also did not know too many people who went to Vietnam. But just kind of going into Vietnam a little bit, her brothers were almost drafted into the war. However, they were not, because when they did the checkup to see if they were physically fit, turned out one of them had asthma and the other one had a spine curvature that they didn't know existed before, and so they never ended up going to war. However, once in high school, she did date a Vietnam veteran who suffered from PTSD, and he really only saw the after effects because whenever he fell sick, he'd have night tremors and like really bad dreams. However, for the soldiers, when they came home, they realized that like most veterans didn't get like a huge welcome home thing, and even though in her city they never really got a big welcome home either, they got a lot of respect from the citizens. Oops. So her favorite president in the 1960s was JFK, and the thing was she referred to John F. Kennedy's family as like the royal family of the United States. She had like a little scrapbook of them, and she had like every single news clipping she had in one little book. And when he was actually assassinated, she lost the scrapbook, and so she considered it a part of the conspiracy thing that was going on at the time. Her civil rights movement, because she lived in Falls City and there weren't that many African Americans there, she didn't really see much about it. She learned a little bit about civil rights during school. However, she never experienced it firsthand until she was in college. When she was in college, she actually brought home an African American friend, and she never realized that her stepfather was not a fan of African Americans. So when she brought him home, he did not even allow him into the house. And though it never really changed her view on African Americans, it really tensioned relations with her father, his stepfather, and it just now they fight a lot apparently. And so for something that other people haven't really mentioned before, is kind of women's rights. And she felt like that she was a big part of that because in high school, the only sports that were around were ones for guys, and she actually was the first women's track team at her school. And during her freshman year, she the girls competed very well, but however the boys didn't, and therefore they thought it was some sort of conspiracy and made her stop. And so there was no girls sports teams for about 3 years. They kept fighting for it and talked and sent letters to the government and the school administration. And in her senior year, they rebooted the track team again. And this is the part of the video. How do I do this sound?
We need to plug this bit in right here.
Yes, as a freshman in high school in 9th grade, we were pushing to have girls' sports. We didn't at that point have anything yet in terms of where you'd have a team competing against other schools, and other towns around the state had that. And so my freshman year, we finally found somebody who would coach us for track and field. So the business teacher said that he would help be a coach. And so we started our season, and the boys had the rights to all the equipment and the track. As an early practice, girls had to wait till they were done, and we took the late practice. At the beginning of our season then, we won our first 3 track meets, and the boys lost their first 3 track meets. And behind some doors somewhere, it was decided that we were the problem to the boys having lost the track meets. And so our team got dissolved, and we couldn't finish our track season. And so again, because of that, and we found it so grievous, we started writing letters of complaints to our administration, to the superintendent, sending things to state about this, sending things to our senators and any other representatives that we could find in terms of saying, there needs to be this Title IX, we need to have the right to be able to do things. And then finally my senior year, then we got the track team back. And then the year following that, then it was also been put in with our school that the girls had 3 seasons. They had a volleyball season and a basketball season and a track and field season. So my younger sister was able to be a 3-season participant because of the work we feel like that we did.
Yeah, and that was Miss Paula Silverman. Thank you.
I interviewed Miss Levenhagen. She's the ceramics teacher, if you guys don't know. So she was born in Loyola, Chicago in 1955, and she was a high school student during the 1960s. And she graduated early in 1973 and traveled with her friend throughout Europe. And while she was in high school, she worked as a cashier, waitress, and she was a babysitter. When I asked her about counterculture, she remembered things such as miniskirts, beads, bell bottoms, so pretty much like stuff to do with fashion around her high school. And she said the only involvement she had was like following the fashion that was going on. She remembered anti-war protests for Vietnam, and she said that it was the first time young people like had a voice and exercised their First Amendment. And she said that drug culture was very prevalent. She remembers drugs such as weed and LSD. She was her and her family were against the Vietnam War. Her mom's university that the mom was attending had an anti-war protest day, and when she was in 8th grade, she got to leave school and join the protest with the college. And she said that one of her boyfriends just missed being drafted into the Vietnam War, and her friend's brother was killed during the war. Civil rights in Chicago, she says that the protests occurred in the South Side and West Side. She wasn't involved, but she heard about the movement. For the presidents, she was 8 years old when President Kennedy was shot, and she remembers that on her television, it only had 3 stations, and it was the news segment that played over and over again, and it impacted her family, because they were liberal Democrats, and her family were big Kennedy fans. LBJ, she thought he was an evil president because he was pro-war. However, he did things such as like developing park districts in Chicago, and she also said Nixon was an evil president, and he was worse than LBJ because he escalated the war.
Okay, so the one thing that had a lot of impact on me in the 1960s was in 1968. I got to leave school in 8th grade, and my mother was going to university at that time in Chicago, and with a couple of my friends, we all went to an anti-war protest at the Loyola University in Chicago, and we got to make signs and just walk with, it seemed like, you know, hundreds of people. Maybe it wasn't that much, but it seemed like a lot of people, and just, you know, do our kind of screaming, no war, and we won't go to war, and things like that. And I also knew people who were killed in the Vietnam War, and so it rang true to be a part of that whole scene. So that was a very significant part of my 1960s. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and she told me like her overall like summary about the 1960s. She told me that it's best to follow the counterculture movements. She said find an adventure for her was traveling to Europe after she graduated high school. She said while she was there, she only lived for $15 a day. She said step out of expectations and find what's